The massive space station called Nexus Prime floated in the empty space between star systems like a metal city among the stars. Ships from hundreds of different worlds docked at its ports every day, bringing alien beings of all shapes and sizes to conduct business, make deals, and discuss the future of the galaxy. Today was special because the Galactic Council was meeting to talk about the newest species to join their community. Ambassador Kang Wu stepped off his ship and looked around at the busy docking bay. Humans had been traveling between stars for only 50 years, which was very short compared to most other species. Some aliens had been exploring space for thousands of years. Kang Wu was a tall man with kind eyes and gray hair, wearing the simple blue uniform that all human diplomats wore. He carried a small bag and walked slowly, watching everything around him with quiet interest. The other aliens in the docking bay looked at him with curiosity. Humans were still new and strange to most of them. Some whispered to each other as he passed. A few pointed at his appearance, noting how different humans looked from their own species. Kang Wu smiled politely at anyone who looked his way and continued walking toward the main meeting hall. Captain Li Hyun followed behind the ambassador, wearing the black uniform of human military personnel. She was shorter than Kang Wu, but moved with the confident steps of someone used to giving orders. Her job was to observe and protect the ambassador, but mostly to watch and learn about the other species' military capabilities. Li Hyun noticed everything: the weapons the alien guards carried, the way they moved, their numbers, and their positions. The council chamber was enormous, with seats arranged in circles going up toward the ceiling like a giant bowl. Each species had their own section with special air, gravity, and temperature controls to keep them comfortable. The humans had been given a small section near the back, which showed their low status in galactic politics. Elder Nixala was already in her place at the center of the chamber. She was ancient even by the standards of her long-lived species, looking like a giant sea creature with multiple arms and wise old eyes. Her people had been watching the galaxy for longer than any other species could remember. When she spoke, everyone listened because her words came from centuries of experience and wisdom. High Counselor Vextar sat in the section reserved for military leaders. He was large and covered in thick scales, with sharp teeth and claws that marked him as a predator. His species, the Korthax, had built a huge empire by conquering other worlds through force. Vextar was proud of his military victories and looked down on species he considered weak or peaceful. The meeting began with the usual ceremonies and greetings in many different languages. Then the council secretary, a being that looked like a walking tree, announced the main topic of discussion. The humans had been expanding their territory steadily for the past 20 years, establishing colonies and trade routes with impressive speed and efficiency. Some council members wanted to know if this expansion posed a threat to galactic peace. Kang Wu stood up when invited to speak. He walked to the center of the chamber with calm, measured steps. His voice was clear and steady as he explained humanity's goals and methods. Humans wanted only to find new homes for their growing population and to trade peacefully with other species. They had no interest in conquest or conflict. Their expansion was careful and organized, always respecting the territories and rights of established civilizations. Several alien representatives asked questions about human technology, military strength, and long-term plans. Kang Wu answered each question honestly and completely. He explained that humans preferred to solve problems through talking rather than fighting. Their ships were built for exploration and transport, not war. Their colonies were designed to be self-sufficient and peaceful. Vextar listened to these answers with growing contempt. He had heard similar words from many species before conquering them. In his experience, claims of peaceful intentions usually hid weakness and fear. He studied the human ambassador and his military escort, noting their small size and simple equipment. Their ship was tiny compared to Korthak warships, and their technology seemed basic. But Elder Nixala was paying attention to different details. She watched how Kang Wu moved and spoke, noting the calm confidence in his manner. She observed Captain Li Hyun, seeing how the human military officer's eyes never stopped moving, constantly analyzing everything around her. Most importantly, she noticed something in their behavior that reminded her of observations from her species' ancient records. When the formal questions ended, Elder Nixala asked for permission to address the council. The chamber fell silent as the ancient being slowly rose from her seat. Her voice was soft but carried clearly throughout the huge room. She spoke of patterns she had observed over many centuries, of species that appeared peaceful on the surface, but carried deeper currents underneath. Elder Nixala described humanity as the quiet storm. She explained that in all her years of watching different civilizations develop and interact, she had learned to recognize certain signs. Humans showed many of these signs: their careful expansion, their efficient organization, their preference for preparation over action, and most tellingly, their willingness to appear weak when they might be strong. The ancient being's words grew more urgent as she continued. She warned the council that humanity's peaceful expansion was not a sign of weakness but of choice. She spoke of species in the distant past that had chosen to set aside their weapons, not because they had forgotten how to fight, but because they remembered too well what fighting could cost. Vextar interrupted with a loud laugh that echoed through the chamber. He stood up and gestured dismissively at the human delegation. These creatures were obviously primitive newcomers with inferior technology and tiny fleets. His empire had conquered dozens of worlds and defeated species far more advanced than humans appeared to be. The idea that such weak-looking beings could pose any real threat was ridiculous. Other military leaders in the chamber nodded in agreement with Vextar's assessment. They looked at the small human delegation and saw nothing to fear. The humans had shown no signs of aggression, made no threats, and demonstrated no superior weapons or defenses. Their ships were small, their colonies were lightly defended, and their military forces seemed minimal. Elder Nixala tried again to make the council understand her concerns. She spoke of humanity's hidden depths and their capacity for total war, but her warnings fell on deaf ears. The younger species saw only what appeared before them: a peaceful, apparently weak civilization that posed no obvious threat to anyone. The debate continued for hours, with various representatives giving their opinions about humanity's status and potential threat level. Most agreed with Vextar that humans were a minor concern at best. Their expansion was slow and careful, their technology seemed standard, and their military appeared weak. Several council members suggested that humanity should be classified as a non-threat and allowed to continue their peaceful expansion without special oversight. When the final vote was called, the result was overwhelming. The Galactic Council officially classified humanity as a minor species with minimal threat potential. They would be allowed to continue their expansion and trade activities without restriction, but they would also receive no special protection if other species decided to challenge them. Kang Wu listened to the vote results without changing expression. When invited to respond, he stood again and walked to the center of the chamber. He thanked the council for their time and consideration. He requested only that human civilian vessels be granted safe passage through established space lanes and that their colonies be treated with the same respect given to other peaceful settlements. Captain Li Hyun watched the alien representatives carefully as the ambassador spoke. She noted which species seemed pleased with the vote, which appeared concerned, and which were already making plans. Her military training helped her recognize the signs of beings who saw opportunity in the council's decision. As the meeting ended and the various delegations began to leave, Elder Nixala made her way over to the human section. She spoke quietly, with Kang Wu, her ancient eyes filled with worry. She warned him that some species would see the council's vote as permission to test human resolve. She advised him to prepare for challenges that might come sooner than expected. Kang Wu nodded respectfully and thanked the elder for her concern. His response was polite but calm, showing no sign of fear or worry. He assured her that humanity understood the risks of expansion and was prepared for whatever might come. His words were chosen carefully, neither threatening nor weak. The human delegation left Nexus Prime quietly, their small ship disappearing into the darkness between stars. Behind them, other species began making their own plans, some seeing opportunity in what they perceived as human weakness. None of them noticed the small communication devices that Captain Li Hyun had placed throughout the station during the meeting or the detailed scans their ship had made of every vessel in the docking bays. As their ship traveled back toward human space, Kang Wu and Li Hyun discussed what they had observed. The ambassador's calm demeanor never changed, but his words carried a weight that suggested deeper preparations. 3 months after the Galactic Council meeting, Commander Vorthak stood on the bridge of his flagship and looked at the star system ahead. The third planet in the system was called New Sol by the humans who lived there, and it would soon belong to the Korthak Empire. This was supposed to be an easy conquest, just another small colony to add to their growing list of victories. The Korthak invasion fleet consisted of 12 heavy warships and 30 smaller support vessels. This was standard force for conquering a lightly defended human world. Vorthak had led many such operations before, and they usually ended within hours. Most species surrendered quickly when faced with overwhelming Korthak military power. On the planet below, Colonel Park Jin watched the alien ships approach through the defense center's main screen. He was a middle-aged man with steady hands and calm eyes, the kind of person who stayed cool under pressure. Around him, human technicians worked at their stations, monitoring the incoming fleet and preparing defensive systems. Dr. Song Mira stood beside the colonel, studying the data streams flowing across multiple screens. She was young but brilliant, one of the top strategic analysts in human space. Her job was to understand enemy capabilities and find ways to use that knowledge effectively. Today she was more interested in learning than fighting. The Korthak ships moved into attack formation with practiced efficiency. Their weapons were powerful and their shields were strong. Vorthak had studied the basic information about human defenses and found them unremarkable. The colony had standard orbital platforms, basic energy shields, and small patrol craft. Nothing that should pose any real challenge to experienced Korthak warriors. Colonel Park Jin activated the colony's emergency protocols as the alien fleet entered weapons range. Warning sirens began sounding across New Sol, alerting all residents to seek shelter in underground facilities. The colony's small defense fleet moved into position, though everyone could see they were badly outnumbered. The first exchange of fire came when Korthak long-range weapons struck the outer orbital platforms. The human defenses responded with their own weapons, but their shots seemed weaker than expected. Vorthak nodded with satisfaction as he watched several human platforms explode under his ship's assault. But Dr. Song Mira was smiling as she watched. The same explosions. Every Korthak weapon that fired was being recorded and analyzed by hidden sensors throughout the system. The frequency of their energy beams, the power output of their plasma cannons, the rotation speed of their shield generators, all of this information was being collected and stored for later use. The human defense ships pulled back toward the U planet as the Korthak fleet advanced. This looked like a normal tactical retreat, but it was actually a carefully planned data collection operation. Every time the aliens fired their weapons, human sensors gathered more information about Korthak, technology, and tactics. Colonel Park Jin ordered the planetary shields to full power as enemy ships entered close orbit. The shields held for several minutes under heavy bombardment, giving the hidden sensors time to record detailed information about Korthak weapon capabilities. When the shields finally failed, it appeared to be due to overwhelming enemy firepower, but the timing was actually controlled by the humans themselves. Vorthak watched with professional interest as human ground defenses opened fire on his ships. The weapons were standard energy cannons and missile launchers, nothing unusual or threatening. His ship's shields easily absorbed the defensive fire while his own weapons systematically destroyed the human positions. The evacuation of New Sol's population proceeded according to established protocols. Transport ships lifted off from spaceports across the planet, carrying civilians to safety at nearby human colonies. Vorthak allowed most of these ships to escape, seeing this as evidence of his victory and human weakness. What the Korthak commander did not realize was that the transport ships carried more than just refugees. Hidden among the civilian evacuation vessels were military intelligence officers, advanced sensor equipment, and detailed recordings of everything that had happened during the battle. The retreating ships also carried tissue samples, equipment, fragments, and other materials that had been secretly collected from Korthak forces. Dr. Song Mira supervised the final stages of the intelligence-gathering operation from the colony's command bunker. Teams of specialists worked quickly to copy all sensor data onto portable storage devices. They had recorded every detail of Korthak weapons, shields, tactics, and ship movements. This information would be invaluable for planning future operations. Last human military units withdrew from their positions as Korthak ground forces began landing on the planet. Colonel Park Jin ordered the destruction of certain facilities to prevent them from falling into enemy hands, but he made sure the explosions looked like desperate acts of a defeated garrison rather than careful intelligence operations. Within 6 hours of the first attack, the Korthak flag was flying over New Seoul's government buildings. Vorthak declared the conquest complete and sent a victory message to High Counselor Vextar. The human colony had fallen with minimal Korthak losses and no significant resistance in the final stages. But General Kim Tae, watching the battle from his command ship in another star system, saw the situation very differently. The elderly human military commander had spent decades preparing for this moment. As reports from New Seoul reached his headquarters, he began issuing orders that activated plans which had been developed in secret for many years. The intelligence data collected during the battle was immediately transmitted to research facilities throughout human space. Scientists and engineers who had been working on theoretical projects suddenly found themselves with detailed information about an actual alien military force. They began adapting their research to counter specific Korthak capabilities. Dr. Song Mira's preliminary analysis was both fascinating and disturbing. The Korthaks were powerful but predictable, relying on superior firepower and intimidation to achieve their goals. Their technology was advanced, but not revolutionary. Most importantly, they showed clear patterns in their tactics that could be exploited by a more flexible opponent. General Kim Tae called an emergency meeting of the Human Defense Council. The 12 most senior military leaders in human space gathered in a secure facility to discuss the implications of the Korthak attack. These men and women had all been preparing for this day, but none of them had wanted it to arrive. The general was old enough to remember the last time humanity had fought a real war. That was during the early days of space exploration, when human colonies had fought each other over resources and territory. The conflicts had been brutal and devastating, teaching hard lessons about the true cost of warfare. Since then, humanity had chosen peace whenever possible. But the attack on New Seoul changed everything. The Korthaks had made the choice for them, crossing a line that could not be uncrossed. General Kim Tae opened a secure communication channel to President Choi Han on Earth and requested permission to activate Protocol 7. Protocol 7 was humanity's most classified military contingency plan. It had been developed over 20 years of careful preparation, based on the assumption that humanity might someday face an aggressive alien species. The protocol covered everything from advanced weapons development to total war mobilization, across all human worlds. President Choi Han listened to General Kim Tae's report in silence. She was a small woman with intelligent eyes and silver hair, someone who had spent her entire political career working for peace between different human factions. The decision she was being asked to make went against everything she had worked for, but she understood the necessity. The president asked about casualties from the New Seoul attack. General Kim Tae reported that fewer than 100 humans had died in the battle, mostly military personnel who had volunteered to stay behind and operate the intelligence-gathering systems. The evacuation had been successful, and most of the colony's population was safe, but the numbers did not matter as much as the principle. An alien species had attacked human civilians without provocation or warning. They had conquered a peaceful colony through force, showing contempt for human rights and sovereignty. This could not be allowed to continue. President Choi Han gave her authorization for Protocol 7 after a long moment of silence. General Kim Tae acknowledged the order and began implementing plans that had been waiting in secret storage for 2 decades. Across human space, military facilities that had been disguised as civilian installations began revealing their true purpose. Admiral Yoon Seok, received the activation order at the hidden naval base in the Kepler system. The massive facility had been built inside a hollow asteroid, completely invisible to outside observation. Inside its protected bays waited ships that had never been seen by alien eyes, vessels designed specifically for warfare against unknown enemies. Engineer Beck Su got the same order at manufacturing facilities on 12 different worlds. These factories had been producing civilian goods for years, but they could be converted to military production within days. The conversion had been planned and tested many times, waiting only for the order to begin. Captain Odong led the most secret unit in human military service. His special operations teams had been. The news of New Sol's fall reached every human world within days. Emergency communication networks that had been built for exactly this purpose carried the message across hundreds of star systems. On colony, worlds, space stations, and exploration ships, humans stopped their daily activities and listened to reports about the Korthak attack. President Choi Hana sat in her office on Earth, reading casualty reports and intelligence summaries. The woman who had spent her entire career promoting peace between human factions now faced the hardest decision any leader could make. The attack on New Sol had killed innocent civilians and conquered a peaceful colony. This could not go unanswered. The president scheduled an emergency broadcast to all human worlds. Her speech would be transmitted simultaneously to every human settlement, from the oldest colonies to the newest frontier outposts. What she was about to say would change the course of human history and reveal truths that had been hidden for decades. General Kim Tae coordinated with military commanders across human space as preparations began for something that had not happened in living memory. Protocol 7 was more than just a battle plan. It was the complete transformation of human civilization from peaceful expansion to total war. The process had been designed to be swift, efficient, and overwhelming. Admiral Yoon Seok stood on the command bridge of his flagship in the hidden Kepler naval base. Around him, the massive asteroid facility hummed with activity as ships that had been in storage for 20 years were brought back to operational status. These vessels had been built during humanity's early expansion period, when contact with hostile aliens was considered inevitable. The ships waiting in the hidden base were unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. They incorporated technologies that human scientists had developed but never deployed, weapon systems that existed only in classified research files, and defensive measures that pushed the boundaries of known physics. Each ship was a masterpiece of military engineering designed for one purpose: victory in space combat against any opponent. Engineer Baek Su supervised the conversion of civilian manufacturing facilities to military production across 12 worlds. The factories that had been making consumer goods, construction equipment, and farming machinery began retooling their assembly lines. Within hours, they were producing weapons, armor, and military equipment, using designs that had been perfected in secret over many years. The conversion process was so smooth and rapid that it seemed almost magical. But this was the result of careful planning and preparation that had begun during humanity's first steps into space. Every major manufacturing facility had been designed with dual capabilities, ready to switch from civilian to military production at a moment's notice. Captain Odong received his mission orders at a classified facility hidden beneath the surface of Mars. His special operations teams had been training for covert missions behind enemy lines for over a decade. They used experimental stealth technology, advanced weapons, and infiltration techniques that had been developed specifically for operations against unknown alien species. The special operations units represented the cutting edge of human military capability. Each soldier was equipped with gear that was decades ahead of anything the galaxy had seen, trained in tactics that exploited human advantages in adaptability and innovation. They were ghosts who could strike anywhere without warning and disappear without trace. President Choi Hana began her historic broadcast with a moment of silence for the victims of the New Sol attack. She spoke simply and clearly about the choice that faced humanity: accept conquest by aggressive aliens or defend themselves with everything they possessed. Her words carried across space to reach every human ear, from children in schools to elderly colonists on distant worlds. The president explained something that most humans had never fully understood. The peaceful expansion of human civilization had not been the result of weakness or inability to fight. It had been a conscious choice made by leaders who remembered the cost of war and hoped never to pay it again. But the Korthak attack had taken that choice away from them. She revealed that humanity possessed military capabilities far beyond what any alien species suspected. The small defensive fleets visible to outside observers were only a fraction of human naval power. The lightly defended colonies were protected by hidden systems that could be activated when needed. The peaceful traders and explorers moving between stars carried within them the capacity for devastating warfare. President Choi Hana spoke about humanity's violent past, when different human groups had fought each other for resources, territory, and ideology. Those wars had been brutal and destructive, teaching lessons that shaped everything that came afterward. Humans had learned to be very, very good at warfare, which was exactly why they had chosen to avoid it whenever possible. But the choice of peace had always come with a condition. It would last only as long as others respected it. The Korthak attack on New Sol had violated that condition, awakening something that had been deliberately kept sleeping. The galaxy was about to discover what humans were like when they stopped choosing peace and started choosing war. Admiral Yoon Seok watched as the first squadron of reactivated warships moved out of the hidden base toward their assigned positions. These ships carried crews who had trained for this moment their entire careers, officers who had studied every known form of space combat, and weapons that had been designed to fight enemies humanity had never met. The fleet movement was coordinated, with similar operations throughout human space. Hundreds of ships that had been hidden in asteroid bases, deep space facilities, and camouflaged installations began emerging from their concealment. The true size of human naval power was finally being revealed, and it dwarfed anything the galaxy had imagined. Engineer Baek Soo reported that military production was exceeding all projected targets. The converted factories were turning out equipment at rates that seemed impossible to outside observers. But this efficiency came from years of preparation, standardized designs, and manufacturing techniques that had been refined through decades of civilian production. The weapons and equipment rolling off the production lines incorporated technologies that human scientists had been developing in secret research facilities. Energy weapons that used new principles of physics, armor materials that had never been tested in actual combat, and communication systems that operated on frequencies unknown to alien science. Captain Odong's teams began infiltrating Korthak territory using ships and techniques that made them essentially invisible to enemy sensors. They carried equipment for gathering intelligence, disrupting enemy operations, and preparing the way for the larger military force that would follow. Their missions were dangerous, but crucial for the success of the coming campaign. The special operations units moved through Korthak space like shadows, studying enemy positions, mapping defensive systems, and identifying key targets. They planted monitoring devices, sabotaged equipment, and gathered information about Korthak military capabilities and weaknesses. All of this was done without alerting the enemy to their presence. Elder Nixala watched these developments from her ancient observatory with growing alarm. Her sensors detected the movement of human ships from hidden bases, the activation of manufacturing facilities, and the subtle signs of a civilization preparing for total war. What she saw confirmed her worst fears about human capabilities. Kashtir, ancient being, had lived long enough to see many species transform from peace to war. But she had never witnessed anything like the human mobilization. Most species gradually built up their military forces over months or years when preparing for conflict. Humans were revealing a complete war machine that had been hidden and ready for decades. General Kim Tae coordinated the massive logistical operation that was moving millions of tons of military equipment and thousands of personnel to strategic positions throughout human space. The scale of the mobilization was staggering, involving resources that most alien species did not even know humans possessed. The general had fought in the last human war 30 years earlier, during conflicts between different colonial factions. Those experiences had taught him the importance of preparation, overwhelming force, and decisive action. The current situation called for all of these principles to be applied on a galactic scale. President Choi Hana concluded her broadcast with words that would be remembered throughout human history. She announced that humanity was activating its full military potential for the first time since leaving Earth. The peaceful expansion would continue, but it would now be protected by forces that could ensure no alien species would ever again attack human civilians with impunity. The transformation of human civilization was visible throughout the galaxy, as hidden facilities revealed themselves and peaceful colonies activated defensive systems that had been concealed for decades. Trade ships suddenly bristled with weapons, exploration vessels displayed military capabilities, and civilian installations showed their true defensive potential. Commander Vorthak, still occupying New Sol, received disturbing reports from Korthak Intelligence Services. Human ship movements were increasing dramatically throughout their territory. New vessel raining for missions behind enemy. Fleet Admiral Jiang Qiu stood on the bridge of his command ship as the first wave of human warships emerged from hyperspace at the edge of Korthak territory. The massive vessels appeared silently in the darkness between stars, their advanced stealth systems making them nearly invisible to enemy sensors. This was the moment 20 years of preparation had been building toward. The human fleet was unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen in action. Each ship incorporated technologies that pushed the boundaries of known science, weapons that operated on principles unknown to alien civilizations, and defensive systems that had been perfected through decades of theoretical research. Most importantly, every vessel was crewed by personnel who had trained their entire careers for this exact mission. Commander Vorthak was reviewing routine security reports on New Sol when his communication systems erupted with emergency alerts from across the Korthak Empire. Border posts were going silent, patrol fleets were disappearing, and monitoring stations were reporting impossible sensor readings before losing contact entirely. Something was systematically dismantling Korthak military infrastructure. The human attack began with surgical precision that rapidly escalated into overwhelming force. Captain Odong's special operations teams struck simultaneously at communication centers, supply depots, and command facilities throughout Korthak space. These installations simply stopped functioning without any visible sign of attack, leaving enemy commanders blind and confused about what was happening to their empire. Fleet Admiral Jiang Qiu coordinated the space battles using tactics that had never been seen before in galactic warfare. Human ships did not engage in the traditional fleet confrontations that most species expected. Instead, they appeared without warning, struck with devastating precision, and vanished before counterattacks could be organized. It was warfare elevated to the level of science. The human vessels used advanced stealth technology to approach enemy positions undetected. Their weapons fired from ranges that exceeded anything in Korthak experience, using energy frequencies that passed through enemy shields as if they did not exist. When Korthak ships tried to respond, they found themselves fighting enemies that seemed to anticipate every move and counter every strategy. Captain Shin Ai led the psychological warfare division that accompanied the military operations. Her teams did not rely on threats or brutality to break enemy morale. Instead, they demonstrated human technological superiority so completely that Korthak forces began surrendering without attempting to fight. Entire fleets laid down their weapons after witnessing capabilities that defied their understanding of what was possible. The psychological impact was devastating to Korthak military confidence. Soldiers who had conquered dozens of worlds found themselves facing an enemy that seemed to know their every plan before they made it. Officers who had built their careers on successful warfare discovered that all their experience was useless against human tactical superiority. Tactician Lim, one operated from a command center deep within human space, coordinating simultaneous operations across dozens of star systems. The scale of the campaign was unprecedented in galactic history, involving thousands of ships, millions of personnel, and resources that spanned hundreds of worlds. Every operation was precisely timed and perfectly coordinated with every other operation. The human military demonstrated capabilities that shocked even their own leaders. Weapon systems that had existed only in research files proved devastatingly effective in actual combat. Ships that had been built but never tested performed beyond their theoretical specifications. Most remarkably, human personnel adapted to actual warfare with skills that exceeded all training predictions. High Counselor Vextar watched his empire crumble with growing desperation and disbelief. The humans were not fighting like any enemy he had ever encountered. They did not seek glory in battle or honor in victory. They simply eliminated opposition with methodical efficiency, treating warfare as a problem to be solved rather than a contest to be won. The Korthak military tried every strategy and tactic they had learned through centuries of conquest. They attempted massive frontal assaults, clever flanking maneuvers, defensive formations, and strategic retreats. Nothing worked against an enemy that seemed to anticipate every possible response and have countermeasures prepared in advance. Commander. Vorthak found himself trapped on New Sol as human forces systematically isolated every Korthak position throughout their territory. The planet that had seemed like an easy conquest now felt like a prison, surrounded by enemies that could strike at any moment from any direction. His communications with other Korthak commanders grew increasingly desperate as the military situation deteriorated. Fleet Admiral Junkyu received reports from his subordinate commanders, showing the complete collapse of organized Korthak resistance. Enemy fleets that tried to group for major battles were detected and destroyed before they could coordinate their efforts. Individual ships that attempted hit-and-run tactics were hunted down by human vessels that could track them anywhere in the galaxy. The human advantage in warfare came not from superior weapons alone, though their technology was indeed far advanced beyond galactic standards. Their real superiority lay in their approach to conflict itself. While other species treated war as an extension of politics or a test of courage, humans treated it as applied science with the goal of ending conflict as quickly and completely as possible. Captain Shine's psychological warfare teams distributed recordings of human military capabilities throughout Korthak space. These recordings showed the systematic destruction of Korthak military assets with such overwhelming efficiency that many enemy commanders began surrendering entire sectors without attempting resistance. The videos demonstrated that fighting humans was not brave but pointless. Tactician Lim Wan analyzed the intelligence data flowing in from across the combat zones and made real-time adjustments to operational plans. The human military machine was flexible enough to adapt to changing conditions while maintaining the overwhelming pressure that was crushing Korthak resistance. Every enemy response was anticipated, countered, and turned into another human advantage. The speed of the human advance surprised even their own commanders. Star systems that had been scheduled for conquest over weeks or months fell within days or hours. Korthak defensive positions that should have required lengthy sieges were overcome almost immediately. The entire empire was collapsing faster than anyone had thought possible. Elder Nixela monitored the conflict from her observatory with a mixture of fascination and horror. The ancient being was witnessing the complete transformation of galactic military balance. Humans were not just defeating the Korthak Empire. They were demonstrating that traditional concepts of space warfare were obsolete when faced with truly advanced tactical thinking. The systematic dismantling of Korthak military power revealed the true extent of human preparation for this conflict. Every major Korthak installation had been mapped and studied for years. Every enemy weakness had been identified and exploited. Every possible Korthak response had been anticipated and countered. The humans had been preparing to fight this war since their first contact with alien species. High Counselor Vexitar sent desperate messages to the Galactic Council requesting intervention to stop the human advance. He described human military capabilities as impossible and dangerous to galactic stability. His calls for help were largely ignored by council members who still viewed the conflict as a minor dispute between two relatively small powers. Commander Vorthak attempted to organize a final defensive stand on New Sol, using every remaining Korthak resource in the system. His forces included the original invasion fleet plus reinforcements that had been rushed in from other sectors. The combined force should have been sufficient to defend the planet against any reasonable attack, but these were not reasonable circumstances. The Battle of New Sol lasted exactly 4 hours and 17 minutes from the first human ship appearing in the system to the final Korthak surrender. Human forces demonstrated such complete tactical superiority that most enemy units surrendered after witnessing the destruction of the first few ships that attempted resistance. Fleet Admiral Zhang Q accepted Commander Vorthak's surrender personally, meeting with the defeated Korthak commander aboard his own flagship. The human admiral was polite but firm in his terms: complete surrender of all Korthak military forces and immediate withdrawal from all conquered territories. There would be no negotiation and no gradual implementation. The final phase of the campaign involved the systematic occupation of every major Korthak military facility and the dismantling of their ability to wage offensive warfare. Human forces moved through Korthak space like a precision instrument, taking control of strategic positions while treating enemy personnel with surprising consideration for their welfare. Captain Shin Ai's teams worked to maintain order in occupied territories by demonstrating that cooperation with human forces led to better treatment than resistance. The psychological warfare had shifted from breaking enemy morale to building confidence in human justice and fairness. The goal was to end the conflict permanently rather than simply winning battles. Tactician Lim Wan began planning the post-war occupation and reconstruction of former co-president Choi Hana, stood in the ruins of what had once been the Korthak Empire's capital city on their homeworld. The massive government buildings were intact, but empty, their former occupants having fled or surrendered months earlier. She had come here to address the Galactic Council not as a conqueror, but as someone who understood the true cost of the victory humanity had achieved. 6 months had passed since the last Korthak military unit surrendered to human forces. The Empire that had once spanned dozens of star systems and commanded fleets of thousands of warships had been reduced to scattered groups of refugees seeking shelter on neutral worlds. The speed and completeness of their defeat had shocked the entire galaxy into reconsidering everything they thought they knew about warfare and power. Fleet Admiral Zhang Q supervised the systematic dismantling of humanity's war machine with the same precision that had been used to deploy it. The hidden fleets were returning to their concealed bases, the converted factories were switching back to civilian production, and the special operations teams were resuming their peacetime roles as explorers and researchers. The process was carefully designed to demonstrate that humanity's military capabilities were controlled by choice rather than limited by weakness. Every ship that disappeared back into storage, every weapon that was deactivated, every soldier that returned to civilian life was a reminder that human military power existed but was deliberately restrained by human wisdom. Elder Nixala traveled to the former Korthak homeworld to meet with President Choi Hana before the Galactic Council session. The ancient being had lived long enough to see many conquests and many victories, but she had never witnessed anything like humanity's approach to warfare and its aftermath. She needed to understand what she was seeing before she could explain it to others. The meeting between the human president and the ancient alien took place in a simple conference room within the occupied government complex. President Choi Hana received her visitor with the same quiet courtesy she had shown throughout the conflict, while Elder Nixala studied the human leader with eyes that had seen civilizations rise and fall for centuries. Elder Nixala spoke first, expressing her amazement at humanity's military capabilities and her confusion about their current actions. Most species that achieved such a decisive victory would use it to build an empire of their own, conquering other worlds and demanding tribute from defeated enemies. Instead, humans were helping to rebuild what they had destroyed and preparing to return territories they had occupied. President Choi Hana explained that humanity's approach to warfare was fundamentally different from what other species expected. Humans did not fight to gain territory, resources, or power over others. They fought to end threats and restore conditions where peace was possible. The goal was not victory for its own sake, but the elimination of the need for future conflicts. The human president revealed something that no alien species had understood about humanity's expansion into space. The peaceful colonies, trading networks, and diplomatic missions were not signs of a weak species avoiding conflict. They were the preferred state of a species that had learned to be very good at warfare, and chose not to use those skills except when absolutely necessary. She spoke about humanity's violent past on their homeworld, where different human, Groups had fought devastating wars over ideology, resources, and territory. Those conflicts had taught hard lessons about the true cost of warfare, not just in lives and resources lost, but in the damage done to the civilization that survived. Humans had emerged from their violent history with deep understanding of war's consequences. Elder Nixala asked about the hidden military capabilities that humans had revealed during the conflict. President Choi Hana admitted that humanity had been preparing for potential warfare since their first contact with alien species, but this preparation was intended to prevent war rather than enable it. The goal was to be so obviously capable of devastating military action that no rational enemy would choose to fight. The strategy had worked with most species that encountered humanity during their expansion. Careful intelligence gathering and subtle demonstrations of capability had convinced potential enemies that attacking human settlements would be costly and pointless. Only the Korthax had been arrogant enough to ignore the warnings and discover the reality behind humanity's peaceful facade. High Counselor Vexitar sat in his prison cell aboard a human transport ship, waiting to learn his fate. The former emperor of a mighty military empire now wore simple gray clothing and ate basic rations while traveling to face judgment for his crimes. He had requested a meeting with Ambassador Kang Wu, hoping to understand how he had so completely misjudged his human enemies. The human diplomat arrived at the prison facility with the same quiet dignity he had shown at the original Galactic Council meeting. Vextar barely recognized the soft-spoken ambassador as a representative of the species that had utterly destroyed his empire in less than 6 months. The contrast between human appearance and human capability was something he still struggled to comprehend. Ambassador Kang Wu listened patiently as Vextar described his confusion about human military power and his regret about the decisions that had led to the current situation. The former Korthak leader admitted that he had completely misunderstood what humanity represented and what they were capable of achieving when their peaceful expansion was threatened. The human diplomat explained that the destruction of the Korthak Empire had not been motivated by revenge or conquest but by necessity. Humanity could not allow aggressive species to attack their civilians without consequences, because such attacks would encourage other potential enemies to attempt similar actions. The military response had been designed to prevent future wars rather than simply win the current one. Vextar asked why humans were helping to rebuild Korthak worlds instead of enslaving the survivors or seizing their territories. Ambassador Kang Wu's answer was simple. Humanity gained nothing from ruling unwilling subjects or occupying hostile territories. Their goal was to create conditions where former enemies could become peaceful neighbors, which required reconstruction rather than continued oppression. The Galactic Council convened an emergency session to address the new reality created by humanity's military intervention. Representatives from hundreds of species gathered to discuss the implications of human military capabilities and their impact on galactic politics. Many were frightened by what they had witnessed, while others were impressed by human restraint. In victory, President Choi Hana addressed the council from the podium where Elder Nixala had originally given her warning about human capabilities. The human leader spoke calmly about her species' approach to warfare and their commitment to returning to peaceful expansion as quickly as possible. She emphasized that humanity sought no territory or tribute from their victory over the Korthax. Though President announced humanity's intention to help rebuild the former Korthak Empire under new leadership that would respect the rights of other species and maintain peaceful relations with their neighbors. Human forces would withdraw from occupied territories as soon as stable governments could be established and guarantees given against future aggression. She also revealed that humanity was prepared to share some of their advanced technologies with other species, particularly defensive systems that could help smaller civilizations protect themselves against future aggressive expansions. This offer was contingent on agreements to use such technologies only for legitimate defense rather than conquest. Elder Nixala spoke to the council about the lessons that could be learned from observing humanity's approach to warfare and peace. She described humans as unique in galactic history, a species that had mastered the science of warfare so completely that they could choose to avoid it except when absolutely necessary for their survival. The ancient being explained that humanity's Military capabilities were not the result of aggressive expansion or conquest of other species. Instead, they came from careful preparation, scientific research, and theoretical development conducted in anticipation of potential threats. This approach allowed them to deploy overwhelming force when needed while maintaining their commitment to peaceful expansion. Fleet Admiral Jiang Qiu reported to the Council about the dismantling of human military forces and their return to peacetime status. He emphasized that humanity's war capabilities still existed, but were being deliberately restrained by policy decisions made by civilian leadership. The military power that had destroyed the Korthak Empire remained available if future threats emerged. Engineer Beck Su addressed the Council's questions about human technology and manufacturing capabilities. He explained that the rapid military production demonstrated during the conflict was possible because of careful preparation and dual-use facilities, not because humans possessed unlimited resources or magical manufacturing techniques. Captain Odong briefed the Council about human intelligence gathering methods and their commitment to using such capabilities only for defensive purposes in the future. He assured the representatives that humanity had no interest in spying on peaceful species or interfering in their internal affairs unless